Hello, Salem, New Hampshire, and really anyone looking to gain a little more insight into our legislative process. This is my second term as an elected member of the House of Representatives, and we recently wrapped up the first year of the biennium. This year, the legislature considered well over 1,000 bills, and here in New Hampshire, every representative and every senator votes on each and every one of these bills, which you can imagine is quite the undertaking. In addition to my vote, I co-sponsored close to half a dozen bills and otherwise contributed to countless more that came from my committee. This year, I was also the prime sponsor of two bills, HB 108 and HB 115FN. The exact language of both of these bills is now current law, and I could not be happier about that. However, the process for creating these laws could not have been more different. So, for the sake of transparency and to further our collective understanding of civics, which, by the way, is the reason I ran for this office in the first place, I want to share the deliberations on both of these bills. And considering most of this footage is public anyway, I implore my colleagues to do the same. Specifically, this video will compile all of the official meetings on HB 108. Please stay tuned for another video compilation on HB 115FN. So without further ado, let's dive right in, beginning with February of this year.
We can begin the hearing on HB 108 relative to bullying and cyberbullying. And we welcome Representative McDonnell to present her bill.
Hello. Hi. Okay. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. For the record, I am Valerie McDonnell, representing Rockingham 25, which is my hometown of Salem, and also where my friends and neighbors live. And I'm here as the prime sponsor of HB 108 relative to bullying and cyberbullying across multiple school districts. First, thank you for paying attention to this critical issue. Bullying can be challenging to address because it likely has occurred since the beginning of time. And it's not as simple as creating a law that mandates kindness, as I'm sure you all know. We wouldn't be able to enforce that, especially among children, when we can acknowledge that even adults struggle to be kind at times. But what we can do is remedy bullying when it inevitably occurs. And that's what HB 108 hopes to do. This year alone, there are 3 bills which aim to combat bullying. One is actually going to be heard after this bill. But they each come from a different perspective. HB 108 specifically does not conflict with either bill, so if the committee decided it could be passed alongside either bill without any conflict. Furthermore, the other 2 bills examine the big picture, whereas HB 108 focuses on the more nuanced issues of cross-district bullying as well as cyberbullying. Being the only bill to address these specific issues, it would have a tremendous benefit to the well-being and as well as the mental health of New Hampshire students. Unfortunately, this is not a proactive measure, although I really wish it was. In reality, students have had access to advanced technology for the better part of 2 decades. So the future that past legislatures could only dream of is already here, and in large part has already happened. So we are behind in addressing cyberbullying. But I don't think that's really the legislature's fault because the technology has rapidly advanced, but the legislature is obligated to mitigate the risk to our students, and that's what I hope to do today. After all, the technology will continue to advance, leaving students even more vulnerable to cyberbullying. The heartbreaking story of one of those students inspired a bill, which was placed in interim study last year, but a consensus on how to move forward was never reached, which indicated that further deliberation was needed. And this session, I brought this bill forward to do just that. And I look forward to collaborating in a bipartisan manner to reach that consensus, and thus a solution for the student, her family, and for the state of New Hampshire. Specifically, I ask you to draw your attention on the bill to lines 9 through 11. They read, in cases of bullying and or cyberbullying across multiple school districts, the district where the action originated is responsible for the investigation. End quote. This sentence answers a question that current law leaves ambiguous. Who investigates the claim once we suspect bullying has already occurred? By putting this best practice into law, we would greatly increase accountability. However, if the committee would rather the other district be responsible for the investigation, I'm not opposed to that either. I just think it's important that we put a responsibility in law. Regardless of who it is, the law should clearly state who that entity is. In fact, I have spoken with New Hampshire School Boards Association, so NHSBA, as well as NHSAA, and they're in the early stages of drafting an amendment. From what I have seen, I'd be open to the changes they propose, and I understand that they will both be testifying today as well. But finally, I know this is not the Finance Committee, but it is worth noting that this bill does not have a fiscal impact whatsoever. But considering the financial side in the context of bullying, I will leave you with an anonymous quote, which is, kindness is free to give, but priceless to receive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the quote as well. Questions, Representative Selleck?
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. And as you know, the next bill is the one that I've sponsored relating to data around this issue. In the work that I did last summer with a special committee about juveniles who commit misdemeanors with a target focus on hate crimes, one of the things that became clear with a number of these incidents is that they sometimes get escalated to the level where police need to be involved in the investigations beyond the school districts themselves, especially where students who may not be, or children who may not be in a school, a public school setting, are involved in the cyberbullying. And so I'm curious in those circumstances, because obviously police investigations have a cost, right? Yes. So there then would be a fiscal note attributed to it, but also where you have circumstances where perhaps the cyberbully is someone who's not attending a school system, where you see having an investigative authority. And if you've thought about that component of it, if there's a way we could amend this to address those circumstances, or for example, if it originated, let's say at my house, would I be responsible for investigating the issue with my child, right? Because I'm if I chose to homeschool my child, I'm not a school district, right? So I'm just trying to understand how that would come together. I'm sorry, it's complicated.
No, I understand the question, and I'd like to thank you for that, but also for your bill and you're addressing this issue from another angle. I do appreciate it. In terms of that question, if the police were to be involved, I understand there could potentially be a cost to doing that. The LBA did not note that in their amount of the bill. I imagine that would be a more rare circumstance, so it would probably be negligible, but it could perhaps amount to a cost. I would agree with that assessment. The way the bill is written now, it does say where the action originated, the district where the action originated. So I'm unaware of the impact that would have on homeschoolers, but that's definitely something that the committee may want to look at. I would agree. And as I said, I am open to amending language. I have spoken to the School Boards Association, and it is not written in the form of an amendment for OLS yet, but I imagine if the committee wanted to go in that direction, I could arrange that to happen. But on that amendment, they say that the principal of the district or their designee shall be responsible for making sure the investigation is conducted. If they believe that the police needs to get involved, it'd be their purview. Not that the principal has to do the investigation themselves, just that they find somebody to do so, and that is their responsibility. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question, and thank you for bringing the bill forward. In an instance where perhaps things cross state lines, or it's later determined that something exists, I'm curious how you would determine with cyberbullying initially where the locus of it is originating from without an investigation. Sometimes that is hard to determine, and sometimes it's never determined, and so I'm curious to know how you would navigate that conversation as well.
Okay. So this bill, as I mentioned, comes from a bill filed last term, and that was because of a specific instance where we did know where the action originated. It was one particular student over, I believe the application they used was Snapchat, sending pictures, and to be frank, somewhat even sexual remarks to a young girl. To my recollection, the young girl was a recent immigrant, so there was a language barrier as well. So it's picking on somebody who doesn't understand. So it seems to me even more heart-wrenching. And this is a solution to that scenario. I'm not sure how it would impact if we don't know where the situation is. So again, I'd be open to working with the committee to answer questions like that. If the bill, to your recollection, does not answer that already, then I'd be happy to make it more clear.
Representative Balboni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Cyberbullying is a big problem. I think we can all acknowledge that. And some of the issues that have been brought up are problematic, and mine was kind of along the same lines. So what if there's sometimes, like a lot of these things, I'm thinking of pictures being sent, and it involves multiple children, students or children. Some might be in private school, some might be in public school, and that to me is another complication with that with this. And I agree, it's something that should be addressed. I'm just wondering if that's might be something that you've talked about in terms of an amendment, or how to make that work. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I have not considered that particularly, but I am open to, again, having that discussion. And my goal today is to have this. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but in speaking with Chairman Cordelli, I understand since there are several bullying bills that we will have a work session in regards to these bills where a lot of those issues could be worked out. And again, if that is what's needed for this to pass, I'd be open to that type of amendment as well.
Correct. I think we will have further discussions on this topic as a committee, possibly as a full committee work session in the near future. Representative Woodcock, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Cordelli. Thank you for bringing this forward and keeping the concern current, clearly. Two questions. Last year, I remember, similar as you were talking before, Representative Ladd had the question of the New Hampshire-Vermont border.
Yes.
And how does that work here if the Vermont border was the action occurred? And the youngsters in the New Hampshire school. I don't figure how it's going to. I don't see the answer here, but I remember that question from last year. I didn't know if over the summer of the study that it was resolved.
Thank you for the question. I will note that Representative Ladd is a co-sponsor of the bill, so if he were to still have the concern, I imagine it's been addressed. Again, you'd have to follow up with him. I'm not trying to speak for him. My district is on the Massachusetts border, so I would imagine we have a similar concern. The state of New Hampshire does not have any cross districts that are on the Massachusetts border, where we do contract with, I believe, in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. That's not the same case in Massachusetts, but I see the potential for that. My goal with this legislation, if it's not exactly as worded, is to put something into law that addresses this, and we say clearly who is responsible, so we're not passing the buck, so there is accountability, and we know who is doing this. If this wording isn't exactly correct, then I'm willing to put in the work to make this happen and collaborate with whoever I need to get this accomplished.
Right. Okay. And I think, if I remember correctly, you described the incident that initiated the bill last year, and I think there was a question of who was going to investigate it, and neither school wanted to take on that role, and that initiated a lot of discussion at the state level as well.
Yes, unfortunately, neither district was owning up to this, perhaps because of the expense or to do so. And so I just wanted to put something into law so that student isn't vulnerable, because no adults are taking responsibility as they should.
Right. Representative Selleck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this forward. Earlier this year, I received a heartbreaking email from someone in the state, not from my district, but whose son was the victim of cyberbullying through Snapchat. He's a child with special needs, and someone created a fake account of his, which then he got in trouble for, and he was sent to a different district where the people who created the account are currently having no consequences for their behavior. And so I just would invite us, when we get to our work session, to think through not just the who investigates, but how can we create some sort of appropriate but not discriminatory aspect of consequences for some of this behavior. And it's really complicated, as I'll get into when we get to my bill next. But I do know that parent, it will literally make you cry if I share the details of the things that she sent to me. So
Yes, we've heard a number of cases since I've been here of bullying and suicide that are heart-wrenching for sure. Yes, so yeah, it's something that I definitely want us to take a look at as a committee, see what we can advance to the House floor. Representative Woodcock?
And this may be your workshop as well. I'm confused about the term action originated, only to the extent of it was clear to me it was victim and perpetrator, victim like that. So if the action, for example, was two students, and student A was the perpetrator in school A, the over in school B is the victim. Right? But if they're in the same, if the perpetrator was there as well as the victim in that school, say at a dance,
Okay.
and that night that's where the crapola hit the fan. So it was there. So they go back, this perpetrator goes back to the school. That's what I'm getting confused on that rule. And maybe something Representative Cordelli wants to dialogue in the workshop. That's what I'm having a hard time with those terms versus victim, particularly victim.
Okay.
It's just me. I'm just confused.
My intention was not to include words such as victim or perpetrator because that almost implies the result of the investigation before it happens. To say this person did something when we don't know that to be true kind of goes against innocence until proven guilty, which is why I settled on the words action originated. I understand your concern. My intention with this is the district the student attends. If the action occurred perhaps at a school dance, like you mentioned, I wouldn't see that as the district the student attends if it's an out-of-district student. But that's how I would read this.
Thank you.
Representative Hall?
Mr. Chair, and this is more of a point, I think, than a question, but as we talk about out of state, we're talking about neighboring St. Johnsbury, neighboring Massachusetts. It could be not neighboring Kansas, right? It could be anywhere. I mean, to suggest that it's even just across the border, cyberbullying can happen anywhere. So adds another layer to this.
Yes. I don't.
Yes, that wasn't quite. Would you believe?
Yes, I would believe it. Doesn't surprise me in the slightest bit. As has been noted by a few of you, it's definitely a complicated issue, and that's something that should be considered. But it would be remiss not to do anything just because it's difficult. That's not an excuse for us not to act.
Right. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Representative Perez? Welcome to education again, or education policy.
Thank you. Thank you, committee members. Thank you, Chairman Cordelli. This was my bill last year, and I presented it to you all. And I was thrilled to hear when Representative McDonnell was going to bring it forward. And it seems that a lot of the same questions are coming up again. And the story that was from last year just was heart-wrenching. It was a young girl who lived in District A. District B had a young man who had a relative in District A, said, hey, there's this fat, ugly immigrant here. And this guy started harassing her and calling her names and sending pictures and that type of thing. Unfortunately, it's my understanding that nothing happened to that B. And it's heart-wrenching to think the young girl actually was so traumatized by this. She was out of school for like 2 weeks, I believe, before she could return to school. This is about the kids and but we all know cyberbullying is so out of control. It's out of control for adults as well as for children. But my concern is this is year 2 that we are bringing this forward, and we cannot continue to kick kick the can down the road until something extremely traumatic happens. Bullying does cause children to commit suicide. Cyberbullying makes it so easy for them. As far as finding out who did it, the one good thing about cyberbullying is they really technically can find out who the perpetrator was, whereas verbal bullying in the school, it's more of a he said, she said. That's why this is so out of control, because they think that they don't have to, the kids, they don't have to face the person. They can just be horrendous to them. I really would like to see, and I know there's a lot of questions about it. And so you work them out, you find them, you decide what's the important thing. We've changed laws. I mean, if we find that this isn't perfect, when you hash it around, we can look at maybe making it more perfect. But it can't be kicked down the road anymore. We can't lose any more children to suicide because of bullying. And this is about the kids, totally 100%. So thank you for listening. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Representative. Any questions? Representative Balboni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Something that you said just kind of struck me as the schools can only do so much in terms of, tracking these things down. I mean, bullying is an all-pervasive problem that involves other people in a student's
Absolutely.
life. So I would hope that when we're looking at these bullying bills, we look at more a comprehensive solution to the problem. So, and I agree with you. We need to do something about it. Thank you.
Yes, we really need to do something now. And that's why. Any other questions? No?
No, seeing none. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Representative. Barrett Christina.
Thank you, Chairman Cordelli. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Barrett Christina, School Boards Association. I know it's been a long day for everybody. I know you've got at least one more hearing. I will try and be brief. School Boards Association is in full support of House Bill 108. I did email Representative McDonnell yesterday. We connected briefly earlier this morning. What's being passed around is a proposed amendment that the School Boards Association drafted up. I think trying to stay with what Representative McDonnell's intent was when you have bullying across multiple school districts and whose responsibility is it to investigate. Again, we haven't had a chance to do a deep dive into this, but I'll just read it briefly. It's the language in bold in front of you. In cases of bullying or cyberbullying across multiple school districts, the principals or principal's designee of all districts involved shall be responsible for conducting an investigation. In such investigations, the principals or designee are encouraged to collaborate relative to their respective investigations. From our perspective, it doesn't matter where the kids are. If one kid is from Concord and the other kid is from Hooksett and it occurred at the mall in Manchester and it gets reported to those principals have an obligation to at least do something. Make some phone calls, do an investigation, talk to the witnesses, whatever your bullying investigation procedures are. They're very comprehensive in the statute. They're very comprehensive in the NHSBA policy. So again, if there's a committee, a subcommittee or whatnot, and there are tweaks to this language, NHSBA will certainly help in whatever way we can. I hope we sort of caught your intent, Representative McDonnell, with what you were trying to do. We're not married to this language. If there need to be tweaks, we're happy to help. But again, we wanted to sort of make sure that I don't care who the students are. If you're a principal and it comes to your attention, you have an obligation to at least do something about it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Representative Dry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. I appreciate this language. My fear is that if you give a job to a committee, nobody does it. And And I wonder if you could combine this by saying maybe the district where it originated initiates the cooperation so that somebody starts the process.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for the question, Representative. Again, further conversation needs to be had. I think hopefully we can flush that out. We'd be certainly agreeable or amenable to something along those lines. Whatever language can come out, so we make sure that, again, I don't care where the kids are from. If a principal receives a report of that, they have an obligation to do something. Call their principal in the neighboring school, talk to the person that filed the report with them, whether or not that comes from a parent, a student, a witness, maybe the person that informed the principal was not even involved in it, but saw it and was concerned about it, so reported it to the principal. That principal has an obligation to do something, even if it's just call your neighbor down the road in the other school, even though it wasn't my district, but my child in my district saw it with other kids in other districts. That principal should have an obligation to make a phone call so the ball gets rolling and it's dealt with accordingly. Thank you.
If I could ask one question. Thank you. Where and when and how do you see parental involvement in this? When is the parent contacted? I know there's statutes involved currently, and there's something like a 48-hour period to conduct an investigation before the parents are notified based on a waiver request by the superintendent.
Yeah.
That's something along those lines.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Representative. Excuse me a second. I'm not trying to dodge the question to some degree. That might be more an administrative, somebody, an administrator could answer. As I'm sure you're aware, there are 10 references to the word parent in the statute. The policy has to have a procedure for notification within 48 hours of the incident report to the parent or parents or guardian of the victim of bullying or cyberbullying, and the parent or parents of the guardian of the perpetrator. You know, I mean, 48 hours, I guess we can debate whether or not that's sufficient, whether the parent should be known by the end of the day. To some degree, it may be, circumstance specific. How severe was the action? How severe was the allegation? Is the principal perhaps not in the building that day and it was reported to an assistant principal? If an investigation is being undertaken, I understand the desire for the parents to be informed, but sometimes things need to settle out with the administrators and talk to people before, a judgment is made to call the parent. It may be a rumor. It may be nothing happened, and so there's going to be some level of administrative discretion. If it's significant, obviously, if it's cyberbullying, if it's something that relates to what would be illegal or improper discrimination, sexism, racism, whatever it might be, I think there's probably an obligation to call the parent. Your kid said these words in the locker room. So I hope that answered it somewhat.
Right. In your view, if there is sexism involved or racism involved, would you classify that as bullying or a human rights violation? Do you have an idea where that line is? Because I know of a situation, and my understanding is the children have actually left school because of it.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative. I can, as a lawyer but not a practitioner, I can't give a clear answer to that. I will tell you, though, that when the law became effective in 2010 or 2011, when the bullying law became effective, that was a question that a lot of these school law attorneys were having. And I think the standard practice right now of, say, racism, is that an investigation is going to cover both. It's not Title IX. Title IX would be sex discrimination, but it's going to Title VII perhaps, and your local district bullying investigation. That's certainly the safest way for a school district to proceed. So you've got your bases covered on the federal or state discrimination aspect, but also the bullying aspect as well too. Some of that I also think too, again, this may be more for an administrative aspect. It may be the age of the child as well too. An 8-year-old child drops an inappropriate racial slur may be different than a 17-year-old kid saying the same thing, and the context in which it's said. But I certainly there was a situation in a school district probably 10 or 12 years ago, and I say this not jokingly by any means, not light of it. It was the perfect plaintiff. It was a child of color who was a child with disabilities who was being bullied relentlessly, and unfortunately in that case the district did not do their due diligence, and the Office of Civil Rights was on them significantly for a number of years, making sure they had policies, procedures, training in place. So, long-winded answer, Representative. If a superintendent or a principal called me and said these are the general facts and it involved a protected class and bullying, I'd say do both investigations to make sure you're covered.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Woodcock, your turn.
Thank you, sir. Attorney Christina, thank you.
Hey, you works too.
Yeah, except for chairman, right? Well, we'll call him Chairman Ladd. As regards the issue that was brought up, basically Maine,
Yeah.
New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, depending where the border towns are.
Right.
Does your fellow associates, or is there a done with one of you in Maine and Vermont and Mass, or are you the senior in terms of association? And are there cooperative agreements standing? Do you know about?
Thank you for the question, Representative. Yeah, there is a Maine Association of School Committees. There's a Maine Association of School Boards. There's a Vermont School Boards Association. We collaborate, but not in this realm. I'm not aware of any sort of interstate compact that addresses bullying. You know, it's sort of an interesting concept, if you will. Now, I don't remember the bill hearing last year. I either wasn't here or perhaps at another hearing. And kids from St. Johnsbury, kids from Monroe, New Hampshire, and some other communities, I believe, send their kids to St. Johnsbury's Academy over the border. I can't speak to Vermont's bullying laws. I presume St. Johnsbury Academy is subject to those laws. But let's say I'll use Representative McDonnell's sort of hometown. Let's say that a child or a student from Salem is at the Rockingham Mall that's in Salem with a child from Tingsboro, and the child from Salem reports to his or her principal, I was bullied at the Rockingham Mall. The kid is at Tingsboro High School. I would hope that the Salem principal might pick up the horn and call that individual from the principal in Tingsboro. But according to under New Hampshire law, there's certainly the Salem school district they may have an obligation to investigate. They probably should at least look into it, but they certainly wouldn't have any jurisdiction over the kid in Tingsboro to levy any punishment and vice versa. If the alleged bully was from Salem and the victim was from out of state, the out of state Massachusetts wouldn't have any jurisdiction to do anything to the New Hampshire student. Yeah, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, since you're closer to the Maine border, the New Hampshire-Maine Interstate School Compact is RSA 200F1, and the Vermont Compact is 200B1. So those are things we could look at in a work study.
Thank you.
Yes, Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for taking my question. It occurred to me that while we were talking about this sort of theoretical situation that you were referencing here, you were talking about something that may have occurred outside of school hours. So I guess what I was curious about is when would this clause kick in? At any time the districts would get involved, or is this only at school sanctioned events and under school hours when the alleged incident was occurring?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Representative. This is RSA 193-F as in Frank, :4, paragraph 1. Bullying or cyberbullying shall occur when an action or communication, as defined in RSA 193-F:3, A, occurs on or is delivered to school property or a school-sponsored event or an event on or off property off school property, excuse me, or B, occurs off of school property or outside of a school-sponsored activity or event if the conduct interferes with a pupil's educational opportunities or substantially disrupts the orderly operations of a school or school-sponsored activity or event. So if the bullying occurs at Saturday night at the pizza parlor, and it's not a school-sponsored event, but the alleged victim is afraid to come to school on Monday or whatever, that would substantially conduct that would interfere with a pupil's educational opportunity. Likewise, if the event was on, say, a weekend off school property at a non-school sponsored event, the movie theater, let's say, if Monday morning everybody comes in and every kid is talking about it and the principal hears about it, the teachers hear about it, they know it's been posted on social media and the kids are not focusing, an argument could be made that that would, again, this is B, substantially disrupt the orderly operations of the school or school-sponsored activity or event. So the school district not only could look at it, they have an obligation to look into it. Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Cornell.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. So to get back to what Rep. Hall said, what if it's like cyberbullying across the United States?
I mean, get off.
I mean, with the
let's look at the adult. Let's look at the adults first in that situation, and maybe everybody log off for the weekend. And I just, I can't. We can't control a kid from Kansas. You know what I'm saying? You report that if the alleged victim is from New Hampshire and they report it to their principal, what that principal can do, I have no idea. That's
I think law enforcement. At that point. I'm currently being threatened with a ransom scam.
Wow.
For someone who has my ID.
Wow.
My password.
Wow.
And wants money from me. So I've reported it to the local police, and I'm watching my phone to see if some of his threats come to fruition.
Right.
There's all forms of bullying.
How's your Bitcoin portfolio looking?
Exactly what that is. He gave me his Bitcoin account that he wants to deposit it in.
But best of luck, sir.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for your input. Jerry Frew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jerry Frew, New Hampshire Association of School Administrators. I will be brief. We want to speak in support of any legislation that helps assisting the issues of bullying and cyberbullying in our schools. We appreciate the sponsors' efforts to bring this forward. Happy to work with this committee or any committee and any number of bills that are emerging around the issue of bullying to bring common sense, workable, practical solutions to the problem so that we're not spending time, resources, and energy every year having these conversations. We can work toward it. I also would like to just point out whatever enrollment statistics you want to use of however many students we have in the state, 151,000, 155,000, 160,000, whatever it is. I do want to submit that our school district personnel effectively and efficiently investigate hundreds of allegations of bullying each year, and they're successfully resolved. I know that as a legislative committee, you hear some of the, and I'm not dismissing them or in any way diminishing the severity of them. You hear the worst, and you should. And we should be acting to alleviate all of those things. The fact of the matter is also that school administrators investigate, resolve successfully hundreds of bullying incidents, and those are on file with the Department of Education. So with that, I will stop.
Thank you very much. Yes, there are bullying reports annually, number of incidents by school, by grade level and category that are all available. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you, it's true. I'm gonna ask the same thing I asked Barrett. Does your association collaboratively with the other states? Is there any reciprocity in terms of understanding between the superintendents? If I get in Massachusetts, like in the Salem calls, is there anything there that's informal, or is there anything there that's formal or should be between the superintendents of multiple states?
Thank you for the question, Representative Woodcock. Nothing formal that I'm aware of. Again, it could be a good common sense approach, but I'm sure that it would vary from district to district. That they have those interstate issues, but I'm not aware of anything or conversation about it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions, we'll close that hearing.
Let's take a look at 108, which I think is Representative McDonnell's bill. And I believe, Representative, you also had an amendment that I think was passed out.
Yes, during the lunch break, I passed out Amendment 0446H to House Bill 108.
And since this is just a work session, we're just working off the proposed amendment. Is that what we're not obviously?
No, right, we're not.
Okay.
Yeah. Just for discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you want to talk about the bill and the amendment?
Yes. During the hearing for House Bill 108, which I believe was about a week ago or so, there were some concerns raised regarding the bill as presented. So the amendment aims to address those concerns. And it also takes into consideration some points that were raised by the New Hampshire School Boards Association. And so it's very minor changes. And the amendment replaces the bill as well.
Yes, Representative Hall.
Yes, Representative McDonnell, can I call him Representative McDonnell? Could you just explain like what actually changed? If I had to do the side by side?
Sure. On the amendment, if you look at line 11 and onward, that's the part that's changed, and I'll just read it to you. In cases of bullying and or cyberbullying across multiple school districts, the principals or designees of all districts involved shall be responsible for conducting an investigation and are encouraged to collaborate. In such cases, the investigation shall be initiated by the principal or designee of the first district to learn of the incident. My intention with this is because within the original bill, I said where the action originated. But if we haven't had the investigation yet, we often don't know where the action originated. So the point of this is to say all districts that we believe to be involved should participate. And then the district that's the first to hear about the incident is the one to initiate that investigation. So this encourages more collaboration among the districts. And then I'll point out that it says principal or designee. So if someone in that district is more fit, it really allows for the local control to determine who is the person in each district responsible for these type of things.
Just Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did we get any clarity on the circumstance in which, like, potentially it could be an out-of-state party that would participate in a circumstance, like, in the event of, like, potentially cyberbullying or something like that, where it was out of state? Did we have guidance of, like, how that initiation across state lines would occur, or does that have to, can that simply be done by a district on their own, or does that have to involve another entity to communicate across state lines to ask for that collaboration?
Yeah, that was a question that came up in a prior bill also related to cyberbullying. You know, it could be someone in California.
Right.
I'm not sure if that would be defined as cyberbullying or some other offense. Could we have a lawyer join us at the table, maybe, for her opinion?
Sure.
Right.
I mean, I don't.
I think there was one sitting in the back who works for the department. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, yes, we do have another lawyer in the room also. Right. Yes. And they will always agree.
It's true. I know I'm married to one, so
Yes.
it's a great time in my house. Well, good afternoon.
Could just look closer to you. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. You want me to be louder. No one's ever asked me to do that before. So Diana Fenton, an attorney with the Department of Education. So I'm really appreciative that this committee is taking up this issue of bullying across districts. We have had this case occur. It happened in Profile up north. I don't know the short answer to your question. I think it is an excellent question, and it is just a matter of time. I wasn't really thinking California. I was thinking more along the lines of Massachusetts. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because the world is wide open. So I think in that instance, it was challenging enough when you had two districts having to work together who was responsible for taking the lead. And I think that what I liked about this language is that it specified who was responsible for the investigation, because someone has to take the lead. In terms of, across state lines, that is inherently challenging. And I would assume, without knowing the exact facts, my inclination would be that there would have to be discussions between the state agencies. That's how I would initially handle it if that fact pattern were brought to my attention, which I think, again, it's just a matter of time until that occurs. And my inclination, again, and this is all speculation, right? Before we have an exact fact pattern, we don't know how it's all going to play out. But my inclination would be that the Department of Education would work with its counterpart, the Massachusetts Department of Ed, and have the Department of Ed down there reach out to the district. That's how I would approach it initially. I think that if you had a district reach out to a Massachusetts district, it wouldn't be effective. Not because they don't want to work together, but that's not your best route of communication.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I hear you saying is district to district communication would probably not be the preferred, first set of communication to open the lines between two state. If there is suspicion that there has been an offense out of state, to Representative McDonnell's point, we want to get to the genesis of what happened, but there's nothing compelling that the individual district to have to communicate between one another. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what you said is exactly the issue. There's nothing to compel that cooperation. And I can only compare it, analogize it, if you will, to my prior work as a criminal prosecutor. When we had crimes or a suspect go over state lines, we wouldn't defer to a local police department to coordinate with the other local police department. That would be ineffective. It's not that they don't want to work together, but you would have to raise it to that higher level. So I think when you have two school districts within the state of New Hampshire, we always defer to local control. And this is a great idea to say, who leads this? How does this get accomplished? Because you need to have that direction. The school districts need that direction. But when you have competing interests going across state lines, that is just a completely different analysis. And I think you summarized it perfectly. There's nothing in this legislation, and as compelling as this legislation can be, it's ineffective in Massachusetts, right? It's ineffective in other states. So how does that get accomplished? Again, my go-to would be, I would refer to the state agencies.
May I have one more follow-up?
Sure.
Okay. So my additional question, is there a possibility after the initial state agencies are contacted that there would be other parties contacted between the states, potentially law enforcement, attorney generals, something like that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility to include the Attorney General's office in that discussion. It's going across state lines. That is a totally different analysis. And I would be foolish to sit here and say it is not a big deal. Case in point, when the Department of Education wanted to create an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. It's not a contract, it's a memorandum of understanding. Police departments do it all the time, with the state of Massachusetts to have the ability to check the Massachusetts Central Registry before the Department of Education license someone to teach. That is a common sense policy, if you will. To check that registry, because we have so much back and forth traffic between our two states. We all know that. We had to undertake legislation in order to enter into a memorandum of understanding. We weren't doing a contract. We weren't doing anything that was binding on either state. There was no financial responsibility from either state. And yet I had to come before this legislative body and pass a law that allowed me to then draft a memorandum of understanding. So people ask me, why did that project take you 5 years? Well, let me tell you why it took me 5 years. Because we were going out of state, and because we were going out of state, working with a fellow state agency, it had to go in front of the executive council.
I thought you were going to say it took you 5 years because you were dealing with the New Hampshire legislature.
Oh, no, I would never say that, especially since my microphone is on. But I use that to highlight the point that when you are going out of state, the analysis changes, and it changes significantly.
So I'm sorry, Representative McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Attorney Fenting. To address out-of-state investigations, would this bill benefit from saying that the district should contact the New Hampshire DOE so that the New Hampshire DOE could contact the state agency in Massachusetts, California, or wherever? Or would another line address the issue?
I think it could be a start. And again, I really do applaud this committee for thinking that globally of how do we address these issues that we know are coming. I think in my work, it's so easy that we're always kind of behind the 8 ball instead of getting out ahead of it. So I really applaud you for that. Maybe it's as simple as a line of, in cases of bullying and or cyberbullying across state lines, the New Hampshire School District, and please don't start writing. I'm just spitballing here. The New Hampshire School District will contact the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office would then refer it to the Department of Education if it's appropriate. But recognize that these cases of bullying and cyberbullying can very quickly become criminal in some instances. Right. You just don't know what the fact pattern is going to be. So I would feel more comfortable with having the Attorney General's office looped into that, and they can certainly and would refer it to the Department of Education if they felt it was appropriate.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming in front of us. And correct me if I am incorrect, but isn't there a federal agency that deals specifically with cyberbullying? For some reason, in my memory bank, I do remember hearing about an agency that deals specifically on the federal level with cyberbullying because some of these cases are interstate.
Sure. There very well could be. I'm not aware of it off the top of my head. It wouldn't surprise me because you're right. The impact it has is really quite breathtaking.
Yes, Representative Litchfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. So if we're putting it into law, that we're going to go to the DOE if any of the bullying happens between state lines, would that deter some people from actually going to get help? Like, it just seems to me like it's subjective. Like, wouldn't we want them to have local control to decide whether or not they actually need to get the DOE or the AG involved? Or I feel like I'm missing something here.
I think the issues that have been raised are just recognizing the complexities, the inherent complexities that arise when things go across state lines. And because of those inherent complexities, deferring to local control might be ineffective. And so when you look at the law book that I didn't bring with me to the table, we have interstate compacts with Maine and Vermont. And as a quick aside, when I started at the Department of Education, I had a wonderful colleague who was guiding me those first few months. And we don't have a similar interstate compact with Massachusetts. We don't have one. And it was fascinating to me. And she said to me jokingly, she said, well, that's because it takes an act of Congress. And she was right.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
And we have a school district that is a Vermont, New Hampshire school. And they have struggled historically as to what law applies. Because the reality is, and I'm simplifying it, so please forgive me, but the reality is the minute you go into another state, right, it's just a different analysis. And it is because of that reason that it would be ineffective to just say, we'll defer to local control. Who's local control? When I worked with the New Hampshire Vermont school, and they were struggling because they never decided which law would apply, they suddenly were at odds. And their whole philosophy was, well, we'll decide what law will apply when the issue comes up. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in the school board meeting going, what? They just kicked the can down the road. They needed to decide which law was going to apply and stick with it. And inevitably, deferring to local control, that's going to be the problem that inevitably you'll run into. Which law applies? And that's why in those situations, if within the state of New Hampshire you defer to local control, that's an effective solution. And that's for this policy body to make that decision. But anything over state lines just gets inherently more complicated, and local control will probably not, you will probably see immediate issues if that is how you defer.
Okay. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
And thank you. So I just did a Google search, and the FBI does have a cyber division, which deals with
That makes sense.
these things because it's interstate and not intrastate.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Well, I didn't have the answer, so you shouldn't thank me for it, but I appreciate the...
No, you actually put that in my head, so, you know, if you hadn't sat there, then I wouldn't have thought of it, and the process wouldn't have gone aside.
But I think you're being a little too gracious, but I appreciate it. But I think your point is well taken, right? It's not a local state agency that's in charge of that. It is the FBI, and it is a division of the FBI, and there's a reason for that, because you have to have that federal power in order to have that oversight of the states.
So I'm thinking generally is what we need a few sentences, maybe a paragraph on the topic of cyberbullying across state lines, and a procedure that, you know, just looking at things could be an added subsection under 193F4. and possibly also something in F6 in terms of reporting. Representative Murray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do any of these proposed language options regarding either FBI or Attorney General's office, should we get input from those agencies?
I don't think it would be a, well, if someone's going to contact it, I'll do the local AG and you can do the FBI. How about that?
I'm just asking the question.
I know.
To make sure that we're not getting
Yes.
ourselves
I don't
into a
think it would.
place where
I don't think it would be a bad idea to contact both and indicate what we are considering in terms of legislation on the subject.
I would agree 100% that the Attorney General's office should be looped into that language that you're contemplating inserting. In terms of the FBI, the Department of Safety, they have worked with
They have contacts.
the FBI. There should be some contacts there. They have to clear any law that is written about dissemination of criminal records with the FBI, so that might be an avenue that
so
could
New
be
Hampshire
pursued.
Department of Safety instead.
Yes, the New Hampshire Department of Safety.
Okay.
So, any further comments on cyberbullying across state lines? Representative Murray, did you want to contact Department of Safety, and would someone contact the AG's office? Representative McDonnell, would you do that?
Yes, I can do that.
Great.
And Representative Murray, I have a contact at the Department of Safety. I can send you her information to assist you. Sure. And Representative
There's so many of them.
McDonnell, if you need assistance with the AG's office, I can.
Yeah, right.
I used to work there, so sometimes they still talk to me. But
I appreciate it. Thank you.
of course. Anything further?
No, thank you very much.
I will be in the cheap seats in the back.
Great.
If you need me. Thank you so much.
So I think if, we can accomplish something on this topic, I think that would be a good accomplishment for the committee on this legislation. Does anyone have any questions, Representative McDonald, on her amended language to 108? Representative Hall.
Question, actually. So at the end, it shall be initiated by the principal or designee of the first district to learn of the incident. I'm just wondering if they might, they might not be sure who's the first district. Are they going to talk to each other and say, I got it first, I heard it at 2:00, you heard it at 3? I mean, do you envision that happening or not really?
I can't imagine that happening, but I definitely understand the concern. It's not so much the first district, just that somebody is doing this, which is my goal all along. But it definitely looks like there will be an amendment to the amendment, so I will take that under advisement.
I just a thought. I don't know if it would happen or not. Thank you.
Becky, since I think School Boards Association's name was mentioned in connection with this amendment, would you like to step up to the plate?
Good afternoon, members of the committee and Chairman Cordelli. For the record, Becky Wilson from the New Hampshire School Boards Association. Thank you. I do know that Mr. Christina and I have worked a little bit on this after the original hearing to try to help clear up some of this confusion, I think, and to make sure that Representative McDonnell's concerns were addressed and that you can try to make it as clear as possible in these situations. I think that was the intent of offering this language, so that somebody would take the initiative to start the investigation. If there's other things that I can help with, I'm happy to try to address those. I think Attorney Fenton probably answered most of those questions in terms of the legality of who can do things across state lines. I think it's just in terms of, the day-to-day processing of bullying reports and bullying investigations and trying to determine when kids are being mean to each other versus whether or not it is a bullying situation based on the definition that is in the law of bullying, whether or not you complete the bullying investigation and determine it is actually bullying. There's a lot of pieces to this process that are very prescriptive, and I think that just trying to make sure somebody starts that process is the intention of this amended language.
Representative Murray.
Thank you. I know that we did talk about an amendment to an amendment, and I was curious to know whether or not what a general time frame for these investigations are. I know there's conversation about granting an additional 7 school days, but I can imagine if these are across state lines, this may take quite some time after the initial investigation if it were determined that there were other agencies that needed to be reached. I'm just curious if anyone knows what a general time frame for this type of inquiry is.
Thank you for the question. There are timelines specified in the current bullying law in terms of how long you have for certain parts of the investigation and how long you have to complete those. I was just trying to pull it up off the top of my head, but I have about 800 windows open. I apologize. So there are very formal timeframes for a bullying investigation in terms of when you have to start the bullying investigation once you've been alerted that there is potentially a situation that is bullying, who has to be notified, when you have to notify them, how long you have to make a determination, etc.
Right.
That's all right within the law.
Right. And part of that is in the amendment, the 5 days and the 7 days.
Right.
Right.
And I do see something in subparagraph J of 193F4. Is that maybe where that came from?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we want to attach any number of days to when we get state agencies involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also just speak to, for the administrators that are completing the bullying investigations or their designee, whoever those people are that are doing those, most often it is the principal or an assistant principal or some other school administrator. That is by design to ensure that you have a person with that level of influence at the school level that is making those determinations, and not, I think somebody had made a comment earlier, designating the PE teacher as the bullying investigator. There's some reasons why you would typically have an administrator doing those investigations, because there are so many time frames and legal aspects of making sure that you're completing that investigation with fidelity. It's very difficult sometimes when you get a report of what is considered bullying from a student. Not that it's unfounded. Oftentimes they are founded. Investigations of bullying are founded that way, but I don't know if any of you have ever worked with 7th graders, but you can get reports of somebody being bullied by a 7th grade student, and by the time you get the students together to try to interview them and figure out what is happening, I think somebody mentioned this earlier, you find out they're just being mean to each other. It doesn't necessarily meet the level of qualifications of bullying, but that's why that investigation process exists, to make sure that people are going through the process with fidelity and ensuring that you are making determinations about whether or not there's actually bullying as it's defined in the law versus students are being mean to each other, which happens for sure and needs to be addressed regardless. But in a very different way. Would you address a student who has been founded as a bully or bullying versus a students that are being mean to each other?
Representative Freeman, did you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I found what Representative Murray was looking for under 193F4 Section I, which says a provision that the superintendent or designee may within the 48-hour period grant the school principal or designee a waiver from the notification requirement if the superintendent or designee deems such waiver to be in the best interest of the victim or perpetrator. So you're concerned with if they're working with other agencies or other states, would it be enough time? I think this provision right there would allow that time that's necessary to complete the investigation to occur.
And Kay does talk about requirement for the principal or designee to develop a response to remediate the bullying or cyberbullying. There could be a line added in a number of different locations, including the reporting in relation to cyberbullying, especially across state lines. There, in reporting, there is a requirement for bullying and cyberbullying to be reported to the department, which makes that available as part of a safety report annually. We might expand cyberbullying on there, just to indicate something if it's cyberbullying within state or across state lines, because it'll probably will happen and come to our attention while some of you are still in the legislature.
Yeah, I would just ask the committee to be mindful of the fact that there are differences between disciplinary consequences for bullying versus interventions for a student who has been found as bullying somebody versus the victim's interventions, what they may need if it's founded. And certainly, I think I heard something earlier about, feeling as though perhaps the language didn't, spell out as strongly sort of what is the consequence for the person that has been bullied, or making sure that people are aware that there is some sort of disciplinary consequence. But the people that are completing these investigations, even with founded investigations of bullying, the part of the reason people in the district are responsible for doing those investigations is because they will have access to individual student information about a student's potential needs, whether or not they are potentially covered by special education, whether or not there are some other, situations or extenuating circumstances that could be addressed in a different way other than just a disciplinary consequence. So being cautious about spelling out specifically that you want certain consequences for certain things. There's a lot of reasons why people may or may not know what the consequence was for a bully or a founded bullying situation. There's lots of reasons where that's probably being addressed, but perhaps not in the way people would expect if they're not involved sort of in the inner workings of that.
Right. Good. And just for everybody's timelines on this, as I mentioned, 384 is an early bill. I have that tentatively scheduled for an exec session on March 3rd. And the other two bills, 673 and 108, for March 10th. So as we're trying to make contact with various agencies and come up with some language, we'll need to slot in some time, maybe during that week of March 5th. And everybody has all sorts of time next week to work on these things.
I would just also mention quickly, I don't know, and Attorney Fenton could probably answer this better than I could, but what the intersection would be for situations which would also cross the line into a safe schools violation. That would involve typically the school district working alongside, or at least providing information to their local police department, and they would be involved. And there are some incidences of bullying that I think could on occasion rise to the level of also falling under the safe schools violation. So that would also involve other agencies or MOUs or school resource officers, et cetera. So.
Right. Great. Thank you very much. Anything else with 108? Okay.
So we'll start with House Bill 108, which is relative to bullying and cyberbullying across multiple school districts, and call upon Representative McDonnell for a motion. I think you've been working on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move ought to pass, and with your permission, I'd like to move a further motion.
Thank you. Is there a second for the ought to pass?
Second.
Representative Murray. Discussion, and you have something further
Yes.
you mentioned?
Also like to move amendment 0839H, and you all should have a copy of that provided today. And this replaces the previous amendment that I provided during the work session for this bill.
Second to the amendment.
Second by Representative Terry for the amendment 0839H. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative McDonnell?
Yes. So the amendment replaces the bill, except the effective date, which remains unchanged. It's still 60 days after passage. Just to recap a little bit of the discussion we had of how we got to this point, we were talking about who would initiate the investigation for bullying. We determined that it would be best for all of the districts involved to collaborate, but so somebody would have the role codified in statute. It would be the principal or designee of the first district to learn of the incident. Then we had somewhat agreed on a consensus for the bill, absent the fact that we heard during testimony, I believe, from the department that the bill would be ineffective in other states. So how would we address cross-district bullying, cyberbullying over state lines? And so that's where you're looking at the last sentence, and this begins on line 15, ends on line 18. It's short, so I'll read it to you. In cases of bullying and or cyberbullying across multiple states, the principal or designee of the first district located within New Hampshire to learn of the incident shall contact the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. Reason I settled on the Attorney General is we had some discussion on which groups be contacted. Offline, we had mention of perhaps the Department of Safety, perhaps the Human Rights Commission. We heard during testimony for another bill on a completely unrelated topic also brought up the Human Rights Commission, and we had heard that there is a delay in getting results back from them. And when bullying may be a pressing issue as it relates to self-harm or perhaps suicidal ideation, we don't have that time to wait in these worst cases. So we determined that the Attorney General would be most appropriate. If they choose to forward it to the Human Rights Commission, we'll leave that up to them. And I also had another concern. What if there is a false report? The Attorney General can decide perhaps it's best not to act on this and just leave that up to them in these extreme cases across states, perhaps are more high-risk cases as well. So that is the amendment in front of you. Thank you.
Would the seconder like to comment on?
Only to say that in sum, I believe that the concerns that were expressed during the hearing and in discussions subsequent, that the amendment addresses those concerns in a very positive way and would strengthen the bill if were adopted. So I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Representative McDonnell for working on this as well. I did just want to note one I don't know if it's small, but a minor thing. These are allegations of bullying and or cyberbullying, and so that was potentially the only thing that I thought could need a further clarification at some point, but I see the intent here. So I just wanted to make sure that these are initial allegations prior to a full investigation.
Representative McDonnell.
If I may, I appreciate those comments, and also if you are not aware, Representative Murray has invested quite a bit of time in this bill as well, so I appreciate that. In regards to allegations, I was careful in the wording of this to not include words such as perpetrator or victim, because prior to an investigation, we don't know who's responsible. And again, I had talked to the Attorney General's office regarding false reporting. So I believe the language is clear on that point, but I would not be opposed to subsequent legislation in future years. But I am strongly encouraging that this committee passes something on this issue this year so it's not delayed. So I would not want to let perhaps the perfect be the enemy of the good, but I would not be opposed to that perhaps next year or the year after.
Further conversations? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, we can vote on the amendment.
Vice Chairman Noble.
Yes.
Representative Terry.
Yes.
Representative Dry, yes. Representative Freeman.
Yes.
Representative Litchfield.
Yes.
Representative McDonnell.
Yes.
Representative Tenzar.
Yes.
Representative Nato.
Yes.
Representative Cornell.
Yes.
Representative Murray.
Yes.
Representative Woodcock.
Yes.
Representative Hall.
Yes.
Representative Balboni.
Yes.
Representative Damon.
Yes.
Representative Kluger,
Yes.
Representative Snodgrass,
Yes.
Chairman Cordelli.
Yes,
17 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you. Do you have a further motion, Representative McDonald?
I would move ought to pass on House Bill 108 as amended by 0839H.
Thank you, Representative Murray, seconds. Discussion? Or are we done discussing?
No further discussion.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we vote on the OTP? Madam Clerk, this is House Bill 108 with Amendment 0839H.
Vice Chairman Noble,
Yes.
Representative Terry,
Yes.
Representative Dry, yes. Representative Freeman,
Yes.
Representative Litchfield,
Yes.
Representative McDonnell,
Yes.
Representative Tenzar,
Yes.
Representative Nato,
Yes.
Representative Cornell,
Yes.
Representative Murray,
Yes.
Representative Woodcock,
Yes.
Representative Hall,
Yes.
Representative Balboni,
Yes.
Representative Damon,
Yes.
Representative Kluger,
Yes.
Representative Snodgrass,
Yes.
Chairman Cordelli.
Yes.
17 yeas, 0 nays.
Consent? Yes, great. Thank you.
9:30, and I will open up the hearing on House Bill 108. And the sponsor is Representative McDonnell.
Good morning.
Welcome.
For the record, I am Valerie McDonnell, representing Rockingham 25, which consists of my friends and neighbors in my hometown of Salem. I'm here to present House Bill 108, relative to bullying and cyberbullying across multiple school districts. Thank you for paying attention to this critical issue. Bullying can be challenging to address because it has likely occurred since the beginning of time. So it is not as simple as creating a law that mandates kindness. We could not enforce that. What we can do, what we must do, is remedy how we address bullying, which, unfortunately, is a leading contributor to self-harm and suicide. The problem is magnified by rapidly advancing digital technology. For that reason, House Bill 108 addresses both bullying and cyberbullying. Specifically, please draw your attention to lines 9 through 16. They read, in cases of bullying and or cyberbullying across multiple school districts, the principals or designees of all districts involved shall be responsible for conducting an investigation and are encouraged to collaborate. In such cases, the investigation shall be initiated by the principal or designee of the first district to learn of the incident. In cases of bullying and or cyberbullying across multiple states, the principal or designee of the first district located within New Hampshire to learn of the incident shall contact the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. This language is a result of collaboration with the New Hampshire School Boards Association, the New Hampshire School Administrators Association, and the Attorney General's office. After an extensive work session, the House Education Policy Committee unanimously approved House Bill 108, which then passed the House on the consent calendar, demonstrating that there is a widespread bipartisan consensus that House Bill 108 would have a tremendous benefit to the well-being and mental health of New Hampshire students. Finally, it is worth noting that this bill does not have a fiscal impact whatsoever. Considering that in the context of bullying, I will leave you with this anonymous quote: "Kindness is free to give, but priceless to receive." Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none. You have Senator Altshuler.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I should raise my hand higher. Thank you, Representative, for bringing this forward. So in the work session, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the work session that you had and the input from the Attorney General's office, because I'd like to know how the cyberbullying would be determined when we're multiplying the locations, and how that's not an issue of harassment or stalking that would involve local law enforcement when you're talking about two different schools?
Yes.
Right. I think we're all familiar with that inter-school community issue when we're starting to bridge over. Can you tell me about how that worked out in the work session? Like I'm struggling with how that's not two different things.
Sure. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
And the focus of the work session was looking at that exact issue, if this is across state lines, especially, which is why that last sentence says that we would contact the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. They said that it would be in their purview to determine whether we contact local law enforcement in New Hampshire, perhaps Massachusetts, perhaps another state. And so that was really a discussion from the Attorney General, their input. They also said that it would be important to add principal or designee to leave that local control element. Perhaps the school district has a school resource officer that they say it's in their purview to determine the best case of action. So local law enforcement would be involved scenario to scenario depending on the incident. The goal of this bill is to improve current law and put into statute who is responsible for investigating. Perhaps the investigation determines we should contact local law enforcement, perhaps the Attorney General's office if they think it's an interstate issue.
Follow
up. So tell me a little bit more about how the principal or the designee would be, making a decision about whether or not to call in law enforcement when there's a potential for a child being the victim of a crime, which would immediately trigger the Reporting Act. So how does this leave that gray area, that gray space for principals to make that determination and not have to just report that?
Okay. I think I understand your question. I know in the district I represent, that designee likely would be your school resource officer, and I believe most districts at the moment do have resource officers, so they'd be able to pick that as well. So law enforcement would be directly involved, and if they think that necessary, again, if it's a crime, it may be escalated to the Attorney General's office. In our work session, we also mentioned the Human Rights Commission. I know there has been a delay in getting reports through the Human Rights Commission, so that's why we settled on the Attorney General's office. But the Attorney General, if necessary, they would contact the Human Rights Commission or whoever else they see fit to address the issue.
One more.
And is there a definition for first district?
Thank you for the question. Our committee viewed first district as, rather than say all districts involved, because the original incident was a case of bullying involving two districts.
Yep.
Neither district reported the incident or investigated the incident because they thought the other district would. So my intention is to say first district, and it's not like one district would call the other and say, well, what time did you hear of this? We might have heard of it a few minutes prior. If you think you're the first district, if you know something, say something. And that's really what this is about.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Cordelli supports, doesn't want to speak. Representative Balboni, do you support? Did you want to say anything? You didn't check off whether you want to speak or not speak. Not speak? Okay. Any? Come up here.
Sorry, Peggy Balboni, Rockingham 38. I just want to emphasize that it really was a bipartisan bill. It was trying to tackle the problem that Representative McDonnell said is which district was responsible for starting the investigation. It came up in a bill that we had seen last year that it really wasn't specified in there. If there are improvements to be made, I would encourage you to take a look at it and see if you can make it better. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it passed the House with a voice vote, so I think was... Anybody in the audience who wants to chime in on House Bill 108? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 108. I think we can do 108, House Bill 108. The relative bullying and cyberbullying. Have a motion?
About to pass.
To pass with a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of ought to pass?
Aye.
Aye. Consent?
Second.
5-0. Who wants to take it out? Francis?
Sure. Yes, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to.
This is all of the footage that exists on HB 108. To quickly summarize, HB 108 passed the Education Policy Committee unanimously, passed the House on the consent calendar, passed the Senate Education Committee unanimously, passed the Senate on the consent calendar, and was signed into law by the governor on June 2nd. Just so we are all on the same page, the consent calendar is adopted at the beginning of each session, and this is done to save time when bills are either widely supported or widely disapproved of. In this instance, HB 108 was widely supported and ultimately became law without a single nay vote at any point in the process. What does this mean? The House of Representatives, the Senate, and the governor, we all agreed that there was a need for stronger anti-cyberbullying measures in New Hampshire, and we did something to address it. Yes, our nation is polarized and our state is too, but we come together more than people realize. It's stories like these that don't make the news that restore confidence in the process. Overall, this rewarding experience taught me to focus more on what unites us rather than divides us, and I encourage everyone to seek opportunities to do the same. Moving forward, I know I certainly will. And this concludes the video. Please reach out to me with questions or suggestions. Thank you, Salem.